As little as I remember of it, the 90s really was an interesting time. It was an era of developing media and a mix of senses for baby me. If I wasn't nonchalantly vibing to Queen's greatest hits over the radio, or being horrified by snippets of movies I really shouldn't have been watching at midnight, I was watching Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons on television. The Blue Boy was like my crack growing up. Whether I was at home, at school, anywhere I went, Sonic would be buzzing around in my mind, and you could see him and his adventures just about anywhere. What a time to be alive, dude. I would first experience the Blue Boy on the PC, to be specific, the Sonic & Knuckles collection, and when getting a Sega Mega Drive for Christmas, I got the whole classic trilogy. Sonic 2, then Sonic 1 that came with a multi-pack bundle, and the subject of this video, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles when combined with the additional cartridge. I love this game. I have distinct memories of playing it on many platforms, scribbling down intricate notes on enemies and bosses. One time when my old cousin slept around, we played the first half in the living room well into the night, and continued where we left off the next morning before anyone else woke up. Come rise or shine, we were utter fanatics. Sonic 3, or as it's fully known, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, is quite the interesting case of a game. Its myriad of complications starting from the very start of development to the present day and its convoluted music rights that even today video game historians can't accurately define. There's a lot to talk about with this thing, so buckle your f***les as we go into Sonic 3's history, my experiences with the game, and every other odd detail I've memorized over the years. I hope you're comfortably seated. Would you believe me if I said Sonic 3 was originally conceptualized with pseudo-3-dimensional gameplay? That's what the Sega Technical Institute briefly considered, using the Sega Virtua processor chip to give it a polygonal look like they would later use in Virtua Racer, which was pretty much an answer to Nintendo's Super Effects chip. It's because of its low polygon count when they decided to restart production with a traditional 2D platformer instead, turning what would be Sonic 3D into Sonic 3. Though the game's special stages, and I imagine the heavily pixelated Sonic model on the title screen, were a remnant of that idea. And I love this title screen, by the way. Everything from the background and the traditionally checkered banner is just so pleasing to the eye. The 3D looking models did look better in the Sonic & Knuckles title though. Making an isometric 3D game on this console was possible, as Flicky's Island would later prove. It was just not the innovation this team were focused on. Anyway, so to recap the timeline, the Sega Technical Institute split into two halves, and one was told to make Sonic Spinball, an inherently difficult yet funky pinball side game. The other half would work on the next installment for the mainline games, which would be released towards the end of the Mega Drive's lifespan. As the game was developed on in the United States, steering this ship was Hirokazu Yasuhara, game designer, plus directing for the Sonic 3 portion, and Yuji Naka, producer and lead programmer who really did not want to work with the American team anymore. The dude was reportedly a real pain in the ass to work with unless they spoke his native language, though Sega still hired the guy for his impressive technical prowess. It was him who requested the inclusion of the lock-on cartridge idea after all, so as much of a harsh bugger as he proved he wasn't all talk. The team found influences from many sources, such as Ice Cap Zone and its sudden snowboard segment based off the activities the team did during their downtime, and Angel Island being inspired by an island in San Francisco Bay of the same name. Considering the island was located right across the Sega Technical Institute building, suddenly the in-game visual of a far-off island across the sea sounds more profoundly understandable, certainly invoking its mythicalness. For Sonic 3 anyway, they hired the musical talents of pop musician Michael Jackson himself to write for some of the tracks, although what involvement he had and what music he provided I will go into in a later segment. As is probably common knowledge at this point, Sonic 3 and the add-on Sonic & Knuckles were originally supposed to be one single game with like 100 ideas crammed into it, but was forced to make into two separate games instead, apparently super reluctantly. The team worked super hard with the 34 megabit cartridge with NV RAM despite how sodding expensive they were to manufacture. And since Sega America wanted their tie-in promotion with McDonald's the coming year, it was either break it or leave it, and they ultimately chose the latter. All things considered, the team did the best they could despite the circumstances, even if there was the occasional bug where Knuckles got Sonic's colour palette, or any of the other game-breaking glitches. Although the guys who did the English manuals probably took note of that and added this hand wave in one of their pages. Yeah, they're not glitches, they're Robotnik's diabolical traps, which would become an inside joke for the community. This space in their schedule gave the team more time to develop Sonic 3's second half, implementing level designs that would be fitting for the new playstyles, and introducing Sonic's first rival. Nope, not Metal Sonic, I'm talking about the spike-fisted grape enjoyer, Knuckles the Echidna. Yep, Sonic 3 featured the debut of the prominent recurring punchy guy himself, with Takeshi Thomas Yuda providing the species of animal, and Pamela Kelly giving him the name, although his name was originally Dreads to go along with his dreadlocks. I have a soft spot for his beta Short King design though, it's much more mole-like and I really dig the goggles. It was Yuda who designed the character, although he wore a lot of different hats during production, and he had been a part of Sonic's history since Sonic 2 8-bit, if this credit is anything to go by. There was supposedly a lot of ideas for his fur colour too, with potential proposals for a green colour, or as Naka suggested, a nice purple, but the colour red got the most positive feedback. And I like that they picked that, along with the Rastafarian colour scheme for his shoes. And the peculiar white crescent shape on his chest was, at least to me, thought to be like a Nike symbol, but it's supposed to symbolise the moon and contrast with Sonic's round belly. His red colour goes well with Sonic's blue, and goes really well with the main villain when paired together. Knuckles is a fun inclusion to the cast, and looks very funky on the box art too, and I suppose that's as good of a segue as any. The one I grew up with was the European cover, which was drawn by Duncan Gutteridge, an independent artist who had also been commissioned for promotional artwork and such for Sonic 2. With Sonic and his spunky attitude, his mohawk-looking quills combed to one side, and holding up 3 fingers, bold of them to have the background be the more untraditional 4th zone instead of one more befitting of an iconic level, like Angel Island Zone. Yeah, that was the approach the North American cover went with anyway. Martin showcases the returning characters in the middle of a thick jungle that's being set on fire, with a sinister, shadowy figure glaring from the bushes. The background was originally going to be set in a more South Island adjacent location, and Sonic's fingers make me hungry for some sausages right now. The Japanese cover is consistently abstract, with jagged lines and patterns against a white backdrop, with the character art in the foreground. Not much to say about it, really, but let's not forget the box art for Sonic and Knuckles. The covers are slightly different depending on the region, but front and centre is a very appealing looking logo incorporating the pair's silhouettes. It's pretty badass. In fact, on the North American box art, there's a hidden note on the bottom, and it says, like, comment and subscribe if you like these Sonic retrospectives? Curious, but I implore you to consider. Sonic 3 would be released in 1994, first in North America on the 2nd of February, a little later for Europe and Australia, and in Japan on the 27th of May. The add-on, Sonic & Knuckles, would come out later that year on the 18th of October for most regions, with a November 19th release in Australia. I didn't know of Groundhog Day until writing this script, but the 2nd of February release was to coincide with that local holiday, renaming the festivity Hedgehog Day for it, so that's neat. While the games were technically released as separate products that could be conventionally merged together, for the rest of this video I shall be treating them as one whole game as originally intended, unless I'm mentioning differences and bits and pieces exclusive to those versions. And speaking of versions, I know Sonic Origins came with an updated, widescreen supporting re-release of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and it does look heckin' good, but I'll be mainly covering the original Mega Drive version, as that was the one I grew up with. All good? Great. So the team really put their all in making a deeper, more serious story, and as the series' first instance of continuity not confined to the manual booklets, I feel it reasonable to focus on the game's story and levels first. Last we saw of Dr. Robotnik, his orbital battleship was knocked out of the sky and left careening towards the planet. It happens to land on Angel Island, a mysterious floating island, and the sheer mass of the thing doesn't necessarily cause any lasting harm to the environment, but it does disrupt the balance of the Master Emerald, the thing that allows Angel Island to float. So now it's a regular island. The Japanese manual goes into detail about how Robotnik started terraforming the island to rebuild the Death Egg, but this must have happened later in recent interpretations, so I'll humour them for a second. I love the animations, okay? Robotnik sees that he has landed on a very special island filled with all sorts of delights, including the Master Emerald, but also incurs the wrath of the Guardian of the Green Rock, Knuckles the Echidna, the last of his kind, and a loner who is tough as nails, but is also occasionally an easily tricked goofball. That last aspect comes into play when Robotnik tricks him into going after Sonic and Tails, because he is a kindly scientist, and those two stole all the Chaos Emeralds and are probably going after him too. So they form a truce, a joint effort to eliminate the Hedgehog once and for all that will certainly not bite the Echidna in the arse later. A couple days later, Tails would detect Chaos Emerald energy from his jewel detector following the fall of the Death Egg, and gains knowledge of an ancient civilization that had harnessed the energy of the 7 Chaos Emeralds in their hands, which had also led to their downfall when the Elders tried to harness the power for themselves. We actually see that in a later game, so I'm actually really grateful I got to read this in the Japanese manual. Much thanks again to Sonic Retro for their translations. And so the duo speed right up to Angel Island, Tails flying in the tornado, and Sonic decided to go on ahead in his super form. However, walloping him right out of it is Knuckles, who takes all of their Chaos Emeralds and stores them away. What a bugger. You seeing this crap, Tails? For the remainder of most of the game is the usual obstacle courses, Badnik trouncing, and Dr. Robotnik scuffles, this time across the varied biomes of Angel Island. It starts in Angel Island Zone, a tropical jungle that quickly loses its lushly detailed pixel foliage to a colour palette of searing flames shortly before starting, something Knuckles seems to have no issue with. Following that is Hydrocity Zone, the subterranean system of waterways which conceal ruins and turbine tunnels, Marble Garden Zone, mysterious temples dotted around hillish plains with purplish mountains in the background. Also spikes, lots and lots of spikes. You know, a warning sign would be very helpful here, but I digress. Next is Carnival Night Zone, a metropolis hosting a never-ending carnival, probably built by Robotnik himself judging by its hazards, his affinity for theme parks, and certain deadly traps like the fan nicknamed Barrel of Doom. That sodding barrel has caused me many a time over in my first few years of playing. I'd straight up give in and continue the game as Knuckles, I was so frustrated. How was I supposed to know pressing up and down on the barrel would slowly make your way forward? Oh. The Icy Mountains house Ice Cap Zone, where pristine labyrinthine caverns and snowy slopes exist, and the story comes to a head when Sonic and Tails reach Launch Base Zone, a trap-filled site constructed entirely to repair the fallen Death Egg. Throughout, Knuckles is also encountered a few times, one of which he gets embarrassingly knocked off balance. But yeah, the Death Egg begins its launch sequence yet again, and while Dr. Robotnik confronts them during its ascent, that mech's defeat causes them to launch into the next area, with the big bad battleship once again crashing into Angel Island. This thing goes back and forth more often than a sodding paddleball. Also, depending on what version of the game you're playing, the story either continues to the next zone, or the game ends following a climactic boss fight against the Big Arms mech. A shame that gets eliminated from the main campaign in the full version. Did that thing hurt Supersonic? At the proverbial half point of the game, Mushroom Hills Zone is where the characters are deposited, a forest abundant with mushroom platforms which ends up radically changing seasons as you continue through it. Remember the airship set piece in Angel Island Zone? Well, that's actually the setting for the next zone, Flying Battery. This airship is rather similar to Wing Fortress Zone, but purple. Traps are literally around every corner, there's a lot of magnets to maneuver around, and it's canonically where the prison eggs are stowed away. It was also supposed to take place in between Carnival Night and Ice Cap zones, but I suppose, like Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1, it was pushed forward for its difficulty. That's where Sonic's makeshift snowboard would have come from. Sandopolis Zone is a vast desert with a couple of enigmatic pyramids, and may have been a contribution to my crazy fascination with Egyptian history when I was a kid. Act 2 is notable for being inside one such pyramid, where there's cute little ghosties that float around on the top. Oh god. Lava Reef Zone is probably one of my faves for aesthetic and music reasons. It's the underground interior of Angel Island itself, and full of magma, and most of the floor is made up of large rocks, wooden structures, and curiously volatile machinery. It's this area where the Death Egg had landed, and is where everyone converges in the plot. Nearby is Hidden Palace Zone, the shortest zone in the game, and evidently reusing the title of the previously unused Sonic 2 level. It is where the Master Emerald is located, along with a couple of other intriguing gems, which I'll get into in due time. A high foreshadowing mural. Here is where Sonic and Knuckles have their face-off, Dr. Robotnik enacts his plan to give the Death Egg a new power source, and Knuckles sees who the real bad guy is. So with the Master Emerald stolen, Knuckles finally sees that he has been tricked and helps the heroes out of the pit they were dumped into. He's not around for long though, we did kind of knock the wind out of him and he got electrocuted not too long ago. He reveals the way to the penultimate stage of the main campaign, the ever-popular Sky Sanctuary Zone, sacred ruins which float above Angel Island. The Death Egg has began rising for the third time, and to impede the hero's progress, the good doctor sends out egg robos to cover its launch. You coming, Knuckles? Okay, well, see you in the good ending. The heroes thankfully make it in the nick of time, leaping up onto the Death Egg, which houses the final platform level of the game. Look at all this stuff here. There's laser bridges, electric traps, and gimmicks on every square inch of this zone. And Act 2 introduces anti-gravity sections to the series, where you maneuver the playable character from the ceiling, though your controls are otherwise the same. After felling Dr. Robotnik's newest and biggest mechanical threats, the Master Emerald still ends up in the villain's clutches, and depending on your choices, ends this segment with several outcomes. If you hadn't collected all the Chaos Emeralds, the ending cutscenes appear, showing Angel Island still stuck in the ocean, but still freed from Dr. Robotnik's control. However, he has the Master Emerald in his possession. If playing as Tails and you get all the Chaos Emeralds, then you get his good ending, where the Master Emerald is returned after Sonic catches the fox in the tornado. The green rock is returned to Angel Island, which is able to float again. If you get either set of 7 emeralds, then Sonic follows Dr. Robotnik into the real final zone, Doomsday Zone, only accessible with Supersonic or Hypersonic. Sonic chases Dr. Robotnik for the Master Emerald one last time above Mobius, in various mechs. This officially sets the trend in Sonic games where the final level is only unlocked when all the Chaos Emeralds are collected. Completing this gets the magic rock back, Knuckles is pleased as punch, and Angel Island is restored to the sky as Sonic and Tails celebrate. Another one of Dr. Robotnik's schemes is foiled, and finally, the Death Egg saga comes to a close. Well, there is also Knuckles' playable campaign, available in Sonic & Knuckles and in the joint game, though it's not too different from the main one. Set sometime after Angel Island was restored to normal, as evidenced by the backgrounds of some zones, one of the Egg Robos suddenly reappears to cause a ruckus, ruining the peace, and is joined by all of the Badniks, who are now back in their usual spots. Knuckles follows this Egg Robo across most of the zones, in the exact same order as Sonic and Tails, but taking some different routes, and clashes with this Badnik who rides in all of the mechs its creator had used. All boss battles reintroduced are relatively the same, but with some added attacks, more aggressive battle tactics that overall make them harder to defeat, or in Marble Garden's case, modify the arena and battle entirely. All except for Flying Battery Zone. Did he grow some flesh? Once Knuckles reaches Sky Sanctuary, however, it's revealed that this Egg Robo was working under the orders of Megasonic Mark II, the latest in a line of Sonic copycats which the duo had initially faced off against but didn't properly finish off, so now he's back for vengeance. The Egg Robo is accidentally destroyed before Knuckles and Megasonic have a scuffle, but even after being nearly destroyed again, the robot is cunning enough to attempt other measures. The Master Emerald is right there, somehow, and using it, he becomes Super Megasonic, which is honestly rather badass. However, even that isn't enough to take down Rad Red, and with his proper defeat, the Master Emerald is returned back to Angel Island with the help of Sonic in the tornado. The endings are once again based on whether you have the emeralds or not. Would you rather see Knuckles be a wimpy little baby and witness Angel Island fall back into the ocean, and Megasonic inexplicably return with the green rock in his clutches? Or see the Chad Knuckles holding the Master Emerald in his pink powered up form and Angel Island soaring ever higher, even nearly reaching space? The choice is yours. Thank God Mobians don't need to breathe, am I right? Gosh, that musical swell was triumphant as heck. In fact, that leads me to another important subject regarding Sonic 3. Do Michael Jackson is soundtrack? So, a brief history lesson before we get into the game's soundtrack as we address the elephant in the room. Michael Joseph Jackson, he's this American singer and songwriter, and also a freaking cool dancer, who was extremely popular in the 20th century. Like, he was so popular he appeared practically everywhere. Even in The Simpsons, that's how much of an icon he was. Basically, throughout his life, he was a huge song guy, and a very significant cultural figure. Anyway, back to Sonic. During the development of the first half of Sonic 3, the team decided not to commission the previous game's composer, Masato Nakamura, to make the new soundtrack because his rising star status and how expensive his royalties were. As such, they had to look inward and brought on a bunch of composers. And I mean a lot. The dude had massive shoes to fill. Some standouts were Bradley Buxer, keyboardist and regular collaborator with Michael Jackson, the pop star of which who had worked with Sega to create a game adaptation of Moonwalker, which is its own kind of thing I shan't get into. The arcade one's got penis robots. Mr. Jackson was big on Sonic, and while it's unknown whether he or the Institute approached each other first, he did provide audio snippets of his traditional beatboxing. You can just make it out in the tracks his team composed. Then the thing happened. In 1993, there were accusations around him being inappropriate to children. His public image was at stake, and whoopsie, time to leave the project. Whether the guys at Sega wanted to remove his involvement in the soundtrack, or that he was unsatisfied with the Mega Drive's sound capabilities, there's reports on both of those statements. Sega would hide his contributions and remove his name from the credits. This was towards the end of development too, it's worth mentioning, so during this vigorous period of development, they had to keep his beatboxing in, though many songs he or any of his associates created would eventually be quietly replaced following Sonic & Knuckles' development, and completely replaced in the combined versions, as was the case in the year 2000 when the Sonic & Knuckles collection was released. Using the best MIDI tracks available at the time, the soundtrack was relatively unchanged except for certain level themes from the Sonic 3 portion, and they sound interesting. For the longest time, it was thought that these were written on the fly to finally let the game be re-released legally, but it would be discovered way later in 2019 that this music did exist before. The 1993 prototype used these tracks, so the only explanation was that for this port, they lifted these substitute tracks from the beta, touched them up a bit, and dropped them right in, to the confusion of many fans at the time. This would also be true for the Sonic Origins re-release, which I'll also get into later. It was so crazy being a fan of Sonic 3 music back in the day. Fans could only speculate as their ears picked up similar beats from the King of Pop's albums, which only added fuel to the fires of curiosity. Staff and Sonic team members speaking out about it did nothing to lessen the heated fandom discussions. Naoto Oshima stated Jackson's tracks were not approved because of the controversy involving him. Roger Hector insisted they made an entire soundtrack that took hours upon hours to record, but details involving them were confidential. And Naka would deny MJ's involvement outright. So yeah, if you're wondering why it took so long for Sonic 3 to be brought back officially, these are the reasons why. Through the long, tangled web of contradictions and obscured info. In conclusion, what I can make of it is that these two certainly worked on music tracks for Sonic 3. Most of Jackson's own ones were supposedly scrapped, with Boxer having picked up the pace from MJ's music sheets, which in the finished product sound very, very similar to actual album songs made by each of them. I can't play any of the music at the risk of copyright, but here are the names of zone tracks thought to sound like they were officially recorded songs. I'm sure there's comparisons online somewhere. The rest of the soundtrack had to be lightly rearranged by Sonic Spinball's Howard Drossin, who would be the sole lead composer come Sonic & Knuckles. But he wouldn't be alone. Sound director Jun Sonoe would soon join him, and this guy stuck around for the series for, well, a long bloody time following this, occasionally contributing as composer, so his musical footprint will be heard for quite a while after this game, for better or worse, which, sorry again, I will get into in the re-release section. Sonic 3's music, in my personal opinion, is a step up from Sonic 2's. More complex audio tracks were implemented, and like with Sonic 2, the tracks were very versatile and convey that of a whole orchestra at times with how grandiose the songs are. The music team really outdid themselves in that department. Not to mention that distinct, repetitive drum beat from the first two games was finally eliminated. You know, this sound? Totally gone, for the time being. My personal faves in the soundtrack are Carnival Night, Ice Cap, Launch Base, Lava Reef and Death Egg Zones, plus most of the competition mode songs. And I have vivid memories of vibing to the tracks on my Windows XP computer while working on projects. But there was one track I listened to the most, which caught my attention the moment I heard it, and persists in my brain as my favourite of the soundtrack. Yeah, it's the Sonic 3 final boss theme. So intense, uses the Mega Drive sound font to its fullest potential, became the unofficial theme of a fan favourite Mecha Sonic, and just, it's so freaking good, are you kidding me? Head boppin'. Golly, I've really gone on for this long without talking about the graphics and how the game plays. To be frank, there's not many changes, but still, time to talk about game feel. Oh, look at this swanky save file menu, another first for the series. In this menu, you get to pick which character you play as, be it Sonic, Tails, Sonic and Tails, or if you have the And Knuckles add-on, Red Rad himself. There's also a delete option in the form of Dr. Robotnik towards the right, which you can use to revert a save file into a blank one. Worth noting that as you progress through the game, the accompanying image above the character will correspond to the zone you last reached, and when you complete the campaign with that character, you can pretty much select any stage in the game to start from, all without the need of a hidden level select code, although the game still does feature one. I really enjoy the pixel art in Sonic 3, it's a visual upgrade in detail and really shows off the console's hardware features. It may be from having a different art director than the previous teams, in this case Kunitake Aoki, returning from Sonic 2. Their art direction intended to make the game have a more modern look to it, to contrast with the CGI early polygonal inspirations Oshima and Yamaguchi used. The level tile sets alone showcase just how much the graphical fidelity had evolved, there's so much more dynamic lighting and texture. Metallic surfaces have a blue tint on them, certain tile sets and level details have more intricate animation now, really good animation, and the forests and leaves have so much detail and depth that when the character progresses, the parallax scrolling effect really helps the environment feel organic. Oftentimes you'll see the colour palette shift between different colours, like in Lava Reef Act 2, or have the whole stage just bathed in a heatwave effect. This game is also the first to have Act 1 and Act 2 have distinct variants of the level's music track, and also, a really nice touch, how the end of Act 1 segues immediately to the map of Act 2. It's much cleaner than a fade to black. Also, the explosion effect, one of my favourites in the series to look at and hear. The original game had a lot of orange and smoke as the sound effects popped one after another. Sonic 2 had its meaty looking fiery explosions which looked very nice when layered over each other. Sonic 3s have less frames of animation and come and go pretty quick, but the sound effects are quick too and just very invigorating to hear. I love seeing things blow up in this game. The way mechs crumble and freaking collapse when destroyed, they're blown off pieces with a slight flickering effect. Don't clip me saying I like things blowing up. The zone title sequences were also changed up. It's like a mix of Sonic 1 and Sonic CDs in that it starts with a black background with white text and a red bookmark, and then have the background fade out, followed by the text flying off. It truly is the best of both worlds. Also, the visual effect of entering buildings by removing everything in the foreground once you enter, very neat if underused effect. It's brilliantly shown off in the first act of Angel Island Zone with the hollow tree, but I don't think it gets showcased again until, in 2 of the Eggman bases. Plenty of gameplay aspects are unchanged from Sonic 2. The speed cap was sadly limited, as no matter how fast you might run across these stages, there won't be many, speeding off camera moments. When playing with Sonic and Tails, the AI is still as entertaining as ever. The little buddy will always try and keep up with Sonic, and may end up tumbling into trouble, getting stuck on things and giving the impression that he's having a whale of a time, or in this instance where he single-handedly demolished the first boss. Tails. Rings still net you an extra life if you get 100 of them. Capsules, or prison eggs, still appear at the end of Act's 2 stages, oftentimes in a floating variant to change things up. Springs provide a means to cross gaps and launch up slopes, although they are just as much a hindrance as they are helpful, which is often the case in these games. Oh, pissing blimey. Bumpers appear in Carnival Night Zone, the special stages and Balloon Park, and air bubbles are also plentiful. They can appear on the ground like usual and from within popped balloons, and you'll be seeing them a lot, because golly is there a lot of underwater segments in this game.
Water and water and water, water, 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 water.
Angel Island was brought to the ocean, I suppose, so it narratively makes sense. Metal spikes reappear in nearly every sodding zone, and are an indication of this game's steeper difficulty compared to the other two. When placed side by side with their Sonic CD and Sonic 2 sprites, they are certainly thicker, and even more white than previously, adding to their hostile looks. When you see them, you don't want to be anywhere near them. As well as being jammed onto a couple of other hazards, such as crushers. What happened there? One of Dr. Robotnik's two zones also give the spikes a different appearance for aesthetic purposes. In Ice Cap Zone they look like sharpened icicles, and in Flying Battery Zone they are actually animated and can be pushed in certain spots. I'm surprised more games in this series don't change the appearance of these recurring obstacles. The gold plate at the end has updated art of the cast adorning its sides. Dr. Robotnik with his sparkly glasses, Sonic doing his peace sign, Tails looking at me judgmentally, and Knuckles with his fist out. They appear from the sky after the defeat of mini-bosses at the end of a zone's Act 1, and can be jumped at to keep swirling in the air for extra points, sometimes rarely landing on some extra goodies for you to collect. Item boxes return, housing rings, 1-ups, super shoes, invincibility, or a damaging Robotnik image, and have an updated design compared to Sonic 1 and 2. Instead of a square-shaped television, they resemble Macintosh computer sets, which helps set this game apart from the others even more. Has anyone actually seen a Macintosh Color Classic? They look exactly like the item boxes here. The invincibility music is different in both games, and shares the same theme of the super transformation, along with the extra lives. I'm nostalgic for Sonic 3's one, but I know each of them correspond to their different title themes. They're alright. Water? Thank God, I need a drink. Instead of typical shields, elemental ones make their debut in this game. Not only do these look really cool to have on and grant you an extra hit, but they serve extra gameplay purposes too. As well as allowing Sonic, and only Sonic sadly, extra mobility when you hit the jump button again, it allows the player character to be safe from enemy projectiles, and protects you from hazards of that element for the most part. The fire shield is the most useful in that aspect, as most bosses now have a damaging rocket effect on some parts of them and can only be bypassed with a barrier of fire. It also allows Sonic to dash forward in a burst of speed, the camera barely able to keep up. The Thunder Shield, doubly useful in that not only does it grant Sonic an extra jump, but it gives the inherent ability to have rings automatically gravitate towards you if you're close enough. I'll just say, really satisfying to get these when you reach whole rooms full of the stuff, although watch out for water as it and the fire shield evaporate if you fall in. Ow, my eyes. The water shield is your best friend during underwater segments, letting the player character breathe underwater indefinitely, and letting Sonic do a bouncy maneuver where he immediately spin attacks into the ground. There's also an item box only available in debug mode, namely the S monitor, which gives the user 50 rings and an instant superform. Speaking of Sonic's movements, one new feature is Sonic's Insta Shield, which gives you an extra reach with your spin attack if you don't have a shield on. Good against heavily armed bosses or enemies. It pretty much gives you like a brief moment of invincibility frames. Tails has the ability to fly, a feature he lacked in Sonic 2's original release, and I find it useful for navigation or for reaching hidden areas full of rings. Unlike in Sonic 2 8-bit, you keep your momentum when popping into a jump, which I appreciate very much. Tails is also like an inch shorter than the others, so his hitbox is less likely to be punctured by some hazards, including jutting spikes. Knuckles can glide through the air and climb up walls with his spiky boxing gloves, giving him the means to explore further and allowing the levels much vertical depth in his own tougher routes. The only downside to playing as the red guy is that his jump doesn't reach quite as high, making wall climbing and gliding his main method of traversal and boss strategies. Okay, let's talk bonus stages. Star posts with a similar design to their Sonic 2 look now open the gateway to bonus stages if you have a significant amount of rings. This game uniquely has two flavours of them, but I'll go into the one you get power-ups from first. The colour of the star circles depend on the number of rings you have when you ring the star posts, which is only really used in the combined game. In the original Sonic 3, while sparkles appear if you have 50 or more rings, 50 to 72 rings in the full game, you'll get transported to the Gumball machine, where bouncing up and turning the crank allows a randomized reward of either rings, a 1-up, an empty ball, a bumper ball that's annoying but you can also use to get extra height too, a ball that returns the springs on the bottom, which is only in Sonic 3, and each of the elemental shields, letting you keep it when you leave and return to the platforming gameplay. In Sonic & Knuckles and the combined game, 2 more replaced that one or were included alongside it, depending on the version. And they are as follows. Having 20 to 34 rings will make the star ring yellow and leads to the slot machine stage, which harken back to the Sonic 1 special stages with a slot machine in the middle. Nothing much to know here, but if you get 50 rings from gambling, you get to continue. Risk it all or get fricking wrecked. Just like real gambling. The glowing sphere stage is signalled by the red star ring, available when you have 35 to 49 rings, and it is my least favourite. It's where you're chased by a laser beam and have to race to the top through these peculiar orbiting balls of light. They're a little tricky to get the hang of, but you can pick up some Gumball prizes on your way up. Usually when playing, I tend to avoid these bonus stages because they tend to break the pace of gameplay. But what I don't ignore are the special stages that contain the Chaos Emeralds. You want me to get Sonic's what? Instead of being found at the end of Act 2, giant rings are hidden away in stages, either behind veiled pathways or behind destroyable walls that can be spin dashed into, and you can find a bunch of them in every level if you're a sharp enough player. Their checkerboard planetoid design is certainly eye-catching, and was supposedly inspired by King Kai's planet from Dragon Ball, which, you know, I can kind of see that. These play much differently than usual. It's still a third-person perspective like in the half-pipe, but you move around on a grid collecting blue balls and rings, avoiding red ones like the plague because colliding with them will boot you from the stage. Wait, Knuckles, no! Don't get the red ones because you're red! Blue ones also become red when you run over them, and the aim is to run around the perimeter of these blue spheres to collect them and also turn them into rings, an additional pickup which only really net you a continue if you get enough of them. Other spheres you can encounter are bumper ones, which make you run backwards before you reorient yourself, and yellow ones, which spring you a good distance forward from where you're facing, though you can also jump over them if you don't want to get disorientated, the jump allowing you to leap over 2 spheres of distance. Trust me, crazy things can happen in these stages. I consider myself a pro at Sonic 3, but even I fumble here, and that might have to do with the speed up mechanic. Yeah, one element in this special stage in particular is that the music speeds up every few seconds, forcing you to run faster for taking so long. This can make it especially punishing if you aren't as familiar with these maps, and heaven help you if you're having to speed up during a tight situation. Thank God the HUD at the top tells you how many blue spears you need to collect. Like Sonic 1, these special stages are cycled through in order, so losing in one of the special stages and re-entering a giant ring will just take you to the next one on the list before it loops back around. In Sonic 3 there's also an 8th special stage, available only with a cheat code, and a 9th one in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Just thought I'd mention. Ooh, the Mustard Emerald. Additionally, there is also Blue Sphere. Alright, so if the Sonic and Knuckles combo cartridge had any game other than Sonic 2 or 3 jammed into it, it would load this Easter egg of a mode that's all special stages. And just special stages. Apart from the menu you use to pick the difficulty, it's essentially an endless mode. There's not any rewards out of it unless you're just a big fan of this style of Special Zone, and it's... how many layouts are there? That's so many maps, it can go on forever. Who would do that? The Mad Lads. Getting to the end of a Special Zone after grabbing all of the blue spears nets you a Chaos Emerald. They're designed consistent to the previous titles in that they are Asher-cut gemstones, but their colours here have been finalised as red, green, blue, turquoise, purple, yellow and white. Collecting all of them allows Sonic to become Super Sonic in regular gameplay and unlock the good ending. The same for Knuckles, giving him a glowy pink coloration. But not poor Tails, at first. Lore-wise, people don't often bring up the Super Emeralds, enhanced forms of each of the Chaos Emeralds thanks to the Master Emerald, each getting their own spot in the altar. They certainly resemble the brilliant cut diamonds the Chaos Emeralds would take on later on, but are otherwise their own brand of collectible with their own special stages, the ones from Sonic and Knuckles to be exact. They also come with their own super transformation. Holy frick, the Hyper State. The seizure-inducing rainbow form, even more powerful than the Super State, and only appearing in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Probably for the best, the power scaling would be a right mess. Only available for Sonic and Knuckles, maintaining this form relies on collecting rings, which drain like they would when you're Super, and along with the usual perks, Hyper Sonic can do a double jump and also whites out the screen, damaging any nearby enemies, and Knuckles can slam his fist into a wall while gliding to make the whole screen shake, destroying all badniks on screen. Young Tails attains a super form when getting the Super Emeralds, though it's occasionally called Hyper Tails, and he's just as badass with his flicky army of death. They go after bandits and bosses alike, nearly trivializing certain sections, but it's quite a pleasant reward for going out of your way to collect them all. Lastly, I suppose I'll go into the often overlooked competition mode. I don't think I used this very often back in the day except when racing my cousin or mucking about with my sister to see who can get the slowdown shoes power up or the remote bomb on the item wheel. I mostly remember it for its chibi-fied player sprites. Look at these little guys! An entirely optional mode, harkening back to the 2-player mode from Sonic 2, it contains 5 original stages as super short obstacle courses. Azure Lake, a beautifully pristine area with richly detailed mountains, Balloon Park, a Carnival Night Zone lookalike with animals in the decal, Chrome Gadget, a tricky course in an energy power plant, Desert Palace, a dusty highway with quicksand, and Endless Mine, a green and purple abandoned cavern with the most relaxing, melancholy track you'll ever hear. It's personally one of my favourites, and back when I was a kid I would do time attack mode just to listen to it. As well as beating your own time, you can also race with another player in any of the courses, or pick Grand Prix to do all of them in order, and you can toggle between power-ups being available or not. You know, seeing these guys all chibi makes me really want to talk about them in this video's game. Let's do that. If you've played Sonic 2, you'll know that most of the band of dudes are at their usual posts. You got Sonic and Tails as some of the playable characters, with their rolling into a ball antics, and look at Sonic's sprites, he's got quite a different look this time. Compared to the previous game, his sprites look a little more refined, mature. His general posture has been reworked, and he's got a little smile instead of his mouth being stylized to be hidden from view. And his hurt and death sprites are also different. Perhaps not as iconic as the originals, but I just thought they were worth mentioning. He's also got different animations for being on the edge of platforms, which are always nice to see. And in his idle sprite, he no longer sits on the ground and scowls at you for standing still for too long. Instead, he points at you and then encourages you to get going already. Though sprites of him nodding off do exist in the game's files. Also worth mentioning that the drop dash, which would first appear in Sonic Mania, was conceptualized during production of Sonic 3, but would be cut and replaced with the Insta-Shield, though Megasonic does seem to possess a move similar to that now that I look at him. Tails' sprites are relatively unchanged except for the shading being a tad softer, and his head being redesigned to be more in line with his character art. The flying animation when underwater also shows him dog paddling, which is honestly adorable. Nice fighting pose, bud. Knuckles is a new addition to the cast, and while a rival in the first half of the game's existence, he was promoted to playable character by the time of Sonic & Knuckles' release. While Sonic symbolises speed, Knuckles is all about raw power, and his design is all about emphasising how well he can fight and break down walls with ease, either with a punch or with his massive freaking forehead. Not much else I can say about his design, though as an NPC he had to wear yellow socks instead of green ones because the limited colour palette would have messed with the game's HUD. Dr. Robotnik is the instigator of the plot, and he is felt even after he leaves the story thanks to his robot forces. While his role as an end-of-zone boss is untouched, his villainy and capacity to build like a bajillion mechs are at their most deadly here, and he occasionally makes appearances outside of his machines, usually to control some lethal apparatus against the heroes. Yeah, nice job firing holes in your own ship, you Neanderthal. Also, I know some peeps question why I keep calling him Dr. Robotnik instead of his original and more official name Eggman, and there's 2 simple reasons for that. It's the name he was given when I was a young westerner, so of course I correlate this design of him to that specific name. And 2, it's just out of habit that I call his classic form this name and his modern self Dr. Eggman. I mean, they made a joke about it in Sonic Generations, so it's semi-canon anyway, but I just felt it was something I felt needed clarifying. His sprites are relatively unchanged from Sonic 2, which along with Tails might be due to rushed production, but his Eggmobile is certainly different. It's more comparable to the one from Sonic 1, but more simplistic, with no wings or windshield, and with 2 exhaust pipes and occasionally a glass dome for protection. The game's content itself is bigger, so of course Dr. Robotnik's mechs have to be bigger. I love the design of these things, from the Egg Scorcher Mark III, the Egg Rocket, the giant Eggman Robo and final weapon in the last stretch of the game. They are tricky to fight, but golly do they look brilliant as improvements over the Death Egg Robot's design. I mean, look at this Goliath of a mecha. Also, similar to Sonic 2 back in the day, where most of the bosses had just Eggman at the end, in the manuals, since most of the bosses were occupied by Eggman's Eggmobile, They had Mobile at the end of their name, so, Screw-Mobile, Flame-Mobile, Freezer-Mobile. It was like this for most of them, until Sonic Origins and the Encyclopedia gave them names with Egg at the beginning to coincide with how he names them in every other game. Gotta keep them consistent, Speaking of mechas, Mecha Sonic first appeared in this game, or rather the Mecha Sonic Mark II model. Fans picked up quickly on his sleek design and combat capabilities, which made him fun to fight, even when he reuses some of his creator's methods of eliminating Sonic. You'll never see Metal Sonic do something like that, unless he's disguised as him. He's got such a good design though. I've seen peeps all over the net unite in praising this guy's badassery, either in sprite comics, fan animations, and 3D recreations. The fact that Mecha Sonic was the first to get a super state when using the Master Emerald opened up a whole lot of possibilities for fan ideas during school discussions in the early years of the internet. I tell you, there's nothing that brings Sonic fans together than badass character moments. Also, like the previous model, he possesses one eye, and that eye is also the thing that goes down to his chest when he's in his powering up animation. It's an often overlooked design idea, though I did see it get noted in IDW concept art. Read the accompanying comic to find out where Mecha Sonic ended up. By the by, I do want to make a retrospective on IDW Sonic, not yet anyway, but go check out the Scrapnik Island miniseries at the very least. It is well worth your time, and it's hauntingly brilliant. Animals reappear as the power source of Badniks and the prisoners of capsules at the end, and consist of some of the same species from Sonic 2. They appear in ending cutscenes, and red ones appear in Knuckles' campaign because of palette limitations. Tails has blue flickies that act as extensions of his powered-up form, which power down and flee when that runs out, and they get harassed by egg robos in Sky Sanctuary Zone. Speaking of Badniks, they appear by the truckload and are different in every zone, some of them only appearing in Act 2 of a level to change things up. Their designs are my favourite for the classic era, being outwardly clunky looking and vaguely resembling the wildlife they are based on, and frequently possessing unnaturally large eyeballs. Badniks are certainly more threatening to players here, being designed to trip up the heroes by disguising as spikes, sometimes having more aggressive attack patterns, being innocent at first before revealing their intentions, or just being really quick on the draw like the egg robos. As well as regular enemies, Act 1 of every zone now has a sub-boss fought in between platforming segments. While their attack patterns are simple and they don't typically have discernible faces, certain ones can keep you on your toes. For the remainder of this section, I shall go into each of the enemies and mini-bosses in this game, and I'll be calling the big ones Super Badniks because call it a force of habit as a post-reboot Archie Sonic enjoyer. Monkey Dudes are a variant of the Coconuts Badnik, which climb trees with their hands and tail. They toss a coconut projectile and do nothing but vibe after. Rhinobots charge back and forth, but can do a U-turn and come back for more if they miss. Bluminators look like tulips and periodically spit out two spiky balls that go in an arc. Fire Breath is a mass-produced flying thing that is capable of dropping missiles or using flamethrowers. Super easy if you have a fire shield. Caterpillar Juniors are a variant of that segmented Badnik which float through the air back and forth. Anywhere else but their head will damage you. Point Dexters swim about in set locations and can puff themselves up every few seconds with protective spikes. Mega Chopper, despite the name, are a smaller version of the Chop Chop Badnik. They can latch onto you from both below or above water to sap away your rings and hinder your movement, requiring them to be shaken off to be free. Blastoids are a mobile turret that shoot a string of projectiles straight upward. Destroying one usually reveals the way forward. Buggernauts come in two. Like wisps, they will slowly fly towards you and do collision damage. The little follower cannot be destroyed and simply flees when the bigger one is defeated. Turbo Spikers are an upgrade of the Sonic 2 Badnik which have tank treads, allowing them to flee after launching their shell. They are a little annoying to deal with. A Big Shaker is a mecha in red armour that has rockets orbiting around it, and it uses a mechanism that can create distracting whirlpools. Jaws, with a Z, are basically the equivalent of bullet bills. They slowly fly forward in large groups, self-destructing if they touch you. Bubbles is the name of a blue Badnik which breezes about in a set pattern, occasionally retracting or releasing a spiny defense. Speaking of spikes, Spikers disguise themselves as a bed of spikes, but have a slight metallic sheen that gives them away. They will repeatedly launch little projectiles if you're close. Tunnel bots are mass-produced drillers which will cause a ruckus when making holes in the landscape, making debris and spikes rain down on the arena. Mantises often hop out of the grass to pester you, but otherwise simply hop on the spot. Reliefs aren't Badniks, but they are a common obstacle in Marble Garden Zone. They are seemingly a defense mechanism from a previous civilization and need to be hit on their fricking forehead to proceed. Clammers hide in protective shells and fire spiny balls from a concealed cannon. Jumping on them launches you diagonally upward as if it were a spring. Batbots are initially stationary until you approach, where they will slowly flap towards you. They have a light bulb on their underside, but it's non-lethal. A bowling spin fights in an arena with destructible blocks, which it takes advantage of with its spinning top. When the player character hits it, it leaves itself open to be struck by its own weapon. Sparkles look like grenades which flip from the ceiling to floor, releasing harmful sparks in the process. Star Pointers are an icy Orbinaut variant which slowly send forward their spiny balls as they move forward. Penguinators waddle around and can slide on their bellies to attack, turning around and trying again if they miss. Big Icedus being the Japanese name for the Star Pointer Badnik, is a mecha which makes a shield out of ice chunks which it also tosses down at you. Flybot 767, an airplane homage apparently, appear mainly after you run through alarm systems. They try to dive bomb you. Speaking of Orbinaut, regular ones appear as enemies in the next zone. They move towards you whenever you make any movement. Being in the air doesn't count. Ribots, nice pun there, are stationary badniks with harmful weights which they either swing back and forth or around them in a circle. Snail blasters slowly inch up and down walls. Their shells protect them from harm but are vulnerable when they fire their two projectiles. Corkies are essentially laser cannons which move along tracks, firing a lethal beam straight down. Twin hammers are found inside containers and can, like their name implies, swing their pairs of spiked arms around. Oh, my voice is going weird. Don't forget to hydrate. Botter droids are basically patter-batter badniks that float close enough to collide with the player character. They always appear in pairs or groups of 3. Dragonflies have spiked tails and they float up and down to block your progress. Their heads are their weak point. Mad moles appear out of a hole and toss a mushroom at 2 different trajectories, launching you along with it if it happens to bump into you. Also, one of them pilots the flying battery blimp. Mush meanies disguise themselves as hopping mushrooms, requiring 2 hits to defeat them as the first one only knocks their cap off. Hey-Ho is a lumberjack looking guy who uses its axe to chop off harmful log pieces. It also uses its body and disembodied head if it reaches the bottom. Clockoids are weathercocks which can blow air at you to push you back. I can probably make something out of that. Blaster, not to be confused with Blastoid, are capable of rolling along the ground and firing projectiles in an arc. Techno-squeaks, computer mice that scutter back and forth either on the ground or on walls and ceilings. Gapsule is the name of this fake prison egg that is completely invincible, although it can be tempted to wallop itself with its own spiky flails. The laser prison isn't a badnik or anything, but a callback to the Wing Fortress boss in Sonic 2. It eventually shuts off when the arena is small enough. Scorps roll back and forth on the spot and can send out their tail with a spiky mace on the end. They either have super accurate aim or not at all. Sandworms are another caterpillar variant, and they burrow through quicksand, leaping out in an arc motion every now and then. Rocken is a type of badnik that hides in sand blocks. They can be ridden on or just destroyed after being activated. The Guardian isn't even a robot, but I felt it's worth mentioning as an interesting puzzle boss. It's a stone golem that blocks the way forward. Its only weak point is the head, and it's invulnerable everywhere else, and it must be hit or lured into the quicksand. Hyodoro is the name of the ghosties that inhabit the dark tombs of the pyramid. They can only be temporarily sent away whenever light switches are pulled. Fireworms appear from behind walls, and like the Caterpillar Junior badniks, only their heads can be struck or else you'll get hurt. Toxomister, or is it Toxomister? They are poles with an eye on the top that produce a cloud of gas. It will slow down your movement and slowly drain away your rings until you destroy the source. The Rock Drill is the name given to these robots that appear during certain set pieces, which make the ground fall away underneath you and or itself. Fake rocks, or Iwamodokis, are badniks disguised as rocks that reveal themselves and then blow up into harmful chunks. They cannot be struck, only stepped on as platforms. The Heat Arms are a pair of antennae which fire projectiles at you, and a giant hand which reaches out to try and flatten you. The hand kind of resembles the giant Eggman robos now that I think about it. Egg robos, yeah, all one word, are like elite badniks which fly through the air and shoot a laser beam. They are astute enough to pilot mechas from the looks of things. Spike bonkers try to bonk you with their orbiting spike balls. They guard the inner parts of the death egg. Chain spikes like to zip back and forth at fast speeds, stopping to try and puncture you with one of its extendable spikes. Red Eye sits itself within a metallic column, guarding itself with spike balls that can explode into spikes. During its second phase, it breaks free and tries to fry you with an alarm-triggering laser beam. And lastly, the Death Ball, a remote-controlled robot that protects itself with shields and can only be destroyed by the mine tanks it produces. So with just about everything discussed involving this version of the game, let's close this off with talking about the ported versions, comics, and the legacy among the fandom. We like comic books here, right? MIDI jump scare. That's the first Sonic track Baby Me ever heard, ironically. The Sonic & Knuckles collection for PC wasn't too bad. It was basically the same as the Mega Drive version, barring the music format, and a couple of other quirks due to it being a Windows port. Like, I distinctly remember putting it in windowed mode, and it increased the speed by like times 200. I believe it was due to the CPU speed. It was also notable for including Sonic the Hedgehog the screensaver, which would be a little loud with its game sound effects and compressed audio, but it was always enjoyable seeing the characters slowly cross the screen. I love the Sonic sprites they used in particular. Other ports that were considerably cleaner were on Sonic Jam for the Sega Saturn, Sonic Mega Collection, Sonic Classics Collection for the Nintendo DS, and more. It would be over a decade until an updated port would be made. Christian Whitehead, the dude who championed the remastered iOS ports for Sonic CD, Sonic 1 and then Sonic 2, would make a proof of concept, but Sega would refuse to have it made for reasons. Then, in 2022, Sonic Origins would come out, and a whole new generation would get to experience the game in all its glory. Like other games in the collection, optional missions would be added, cheats where you could use unique item boxes and make every enemy a penguinator, new blue spheres, which added teleporting warp spheres, and green double spheres into the mix. Holy crap, I can't deal. Animated cutscenes, and the drop dash ability would be added. And in Sonic Origins Plus, Amy Rose will be playable in this game. She's even got an option to have Tails follow her around. That's cute. I realise I haven't even touched upon her moveset yet, so for a quick explanation, she plays very much like Sonic, but with Tails' hitbox, and the drop dash is pretty much included into her moveset, where when you hold the jump button again, she does a little charge once she lands on the ground with her hammer. Good for knocking down stuff, and bouncing on enemies really well. Super and Hyper Amy is also possible, once again being the first time a female character has gotten such a transformation, well it isn't with the Soul Emeralds anyway. Although curiously the Super form isn't named, the same with Tails in this version, with the Super Emeralds giving her a Super form instead. In this form she could throw multiple hammers! I swear it's a reference to Sonic the Fighters with one of her moves from there. I'm just really happy to see her here. Also, I wasn't sure how to segue to this, but competition mode is back. Everything's no longer chibi, so they had to redo every single sprite and background asset to make them normal sized. A pretty grand effort for a game mode that not many fans would play. I would be here forever if I mentioned all of the sprite touch-ups and stuff, but for now I'll simply say it's a much more refined experience with both unused and new little features that help make this the definitive version. Not to mention the widescreen support. This makes seeing hazards much more viable and also helps navigate the blue sphere stages with the wider view of the map. For the music, certain tracks were replaced with their beta ones. They were redone using the Mega Drive sound font by June, who also composed the new Super Transformation theme, and while it's a neat, if short, tune, the remixed beta themes, however, I don't like them. I'm not even saying that as a die-hard fan of the old tracks, because I heard these during my first experience with the game on the Compooper, and I never felt they sounded out of place among the other level themes thanks to the MIDI format keeping it consistent. The beta ones here sound bad. They're not as integrated well, and don't sound as complex as the rest of the soundtrack. Do I think the tracks were lazily written? I wouldn't say that. You'd have to physically try to do a poor composing job in these games. I suppose the attempt is more misguided than anything. The team behind this version were also sadly put under strict deadlines to get it all done despite the bugs, in a cruel, ironic case of repeated history. But in the end, I say they did a good job with what they were given. Hats off to you, headcanon. Video games weren't the only medium Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles could be digested by fans. Notably, Archie Sonic comics would make a couple adaptations back in the day. The events of Sonic 3 would be loosely covered in issue number 13, and Sonic & Knuckles had its own one-off. I actually did videos of these two a couple of years ago. If I don't watch them, they're bad. Despite my distaste for some of the stuff, I have a soft spot for these old issues. This era of the comics was so unserious, so full of slapstick and dad joke vibes that it's almost endearing. I like how the flying battery blimp looks like an actual aircraft in one panel, but on the next page it looks like Bender Futurama's head.
Come on, Bender, let's mosey.
Quick, press buttons so Sonic doesn't die in the comic book. Thanks to fan complaints, there would later be the game-accurate Death Egg 3-parter series, known as Sonic Quest, detailing Angel Island being struck and involving Knuckles and the Chaotix, though in the Death Egg itself it was more like the finale of Sonic 2. Silver Sonic would make an appearance, and instead of a Death Egg robot, the big bad would put on the exoskeleton, and physically tussle with the Hedgehog himself using the mecha as a suit. Complex, but ultimately unserious. There was also planned an adaptation of the late part of the story in issue number 291, which we don't know too much about because the comic suddenly ended production, but judging by the early art, it would have covered the Sonic and Knuckles showdown and the Sky Sanctuary segment with Mecha Sonic. Why do they make the Death Egg look so tiny here? That thing is meant to be big. Like, big. Sonic the Comic would also have Dr. Robotnik of that continuity unleash his second Death Egg in an arc covering most of the full game. While I'm not an avid Fleetway Sonic fan, despite it being published in the UK, I'm always interested in just how off-the-wall eccentric their stories and characters are, and I appreciate some good art and intricate detail despite the short number of pages. One time they did accidentally misinterpret Badnik art from the manual because that's just the most they had to go by at the time. The Death Egg was drawn with almost loving detail. The artists always knew how to draw and shade metallic threats, as laughably corny as they were written. In terms of ROM hacks and fan games, you bet they've been made by the shitload considering how long this game took to be updated to modern hardware. You have the usual character sprite replacements, altering of the game's levels or new ones made, or the fans' own re-release of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic 3 Air. It stands for Angel Island Revisited, and it is available as long as you have a compatible Sonic 3 and Knuckles ROM, like on Steam. It's very easy to set up, and I'll put a link in the description also. The amount of customization to tailor your own experience is huge. It's incredible, and it's also mod compatible, including the one that replaces Egg Robo in Knuckles' campaign with Agent Stone of the Sonic movie series. Golly, that was a wild time. Remember when Dr. Robotnik's loyal lackey in the movies was given fan designs by artists to fit more with the classic Sonic aesthetic, and everyone just vibed with it, including the actor? Man, when the fandom puts their creative heads together, they make amazing stuff. As one of the best-selling Mega Drive games of all time, I think it's fair to say that Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has aged really well. The sense of adventure from triumphantly journeying from one zone to the next and taking on giant mechs in a more jam-packed story, for most fans is indescribably captivating as a full package. For critics, it proved above all else that you can teach an old hedgehog new and exciting tricks, even if some felt it didn't innovate quite as much as promised, but that's a fair minority in the critique of this game. In my experience, the game fine-tunes the original platforming and makes the gameplay immersive. The added lore is very interesting to the point it still gets callbacks today as recurring game locations, and altogether makes for a very satisfying playthrough for fans in all walks of life. Very few games in this series would even reach its level of universal acclaim, and to me, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is classic Sonic at its peak. Oh, I want to add it to the tier list, but the S rank is already the highest I can give it. If only there was a way to add... Hail to the king. Thank you to those sticking by for this video. These long ones take a while to make, and I can only imagine they get longer when I reach the Dreamcast generation and beyond. I'm perfectly willing to hear your experiences with Sonic 3 and what you thought of the game in the comments. It makes me beyond happy reading them. For the next video, I'm taking a quick break from platforming titles and making a short vid on Sonic Drift and Sonic Drift 2 for the Sega Game Gear. Yeah, no Master System version this time. It would appear that Spinball was the last Sonic game for that system unless you live in Brazil, so rest in pepperoni, Sega Master System. Thank you ever so much for watching, if indeed you still are, and I'll see you in the next video.